Next question. Jocko. Dear Jocko, my chosen community has lost and continues to lose members due to suicide. One reason is that they don't ask for help. I think one reason they don't ask for help is that they're afraid of being seen as weak. I'm aware that this takes strength and discipline to be able to perceive when you need help and to ask for it. I don't know how to convey that to them. Could you address how one can gather support from their team without losing face?
So there's an obvious reason why I paired these two questions together, because they're both very, very similar, and it's the same thing. And if a member of your team won't come forward and admit they have an issue, then the issue is not going to get addressed. And this is the same exact thing that you have to explain to your team. Like, hey, if you start going down because you're dehydrated, or you start getting frostbite and you need to get warmed up, you need to say something. If you don't say something, that's going to hurt the whole team. That's what's bad. So I think that's important. I think that's important to make sure everyone understands that this part of being a good operator is knowing your limitations, and when you reach your limitations, raising your hand and saying, hey, this is a problem. And believe me, there's guys that might complain about little things, and they're eventually going to be labeled as a little complainer, right? And they don't really have issues. So there's a fine line, right? There's a fine line. But for this one, for someone that's having some kind of mental stress, well, again, we got to recognize what's going on. We got to recognize that it's impacting us negatively at work. So that means you got to raise your hand. If it's having a negative impact on the way you're performing, then you got to raise your hand. And I think it's important to explain to people that this is something that can happen to anybody. And it's not a negative thing. It's just a reality. It's kind of like, it reminds me of being afraid, right? And if you're, let's say you got a new guy that's never done anything before, and he doesn't know that he's going to be afraid going on an operation, then he's going to wonder why his stomach is upset or why he's second guessing himself, or why he can't sleep. Like, oh, you can't sleep. Guess what? That's normal. You're going on a hardcore combat operation tomorrow. The fact that you can't sleep is completely normal. The fact that you feel sick to your stomach is completely normal. The fact that you're shaking, those things are normal. Like, you're going to feel those. That's okay. It's not that big of a deal. And those things are just fear. That's what they are. And if you know what they are, and you know that fear is okay and it's acceptable and it's actually kind of good, right? Because if you're not feeling any fear whatsoever, then you've got some. Well, you should be feeling afraid. You should feel fear. That should propel you. It should get you on edge. All those things are actually happening for a reason. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's the same thing that you got to explain to people with stress. Like, oh, okay, that you can have too much fear. You keep someone at that heightened state for an extended period of time. Well, that's called combat stress, and it's real, and it can happen. It can happen to anyone. And how many books have we talked about on this podcast where you can see combat stress taking its toll on people? And when it does, we've talked about it many times. If you get to that point, you need a break. And Dick Winters from Band of Brothers, he would give those guys breaks without them even knowing that he was giving them a break. He'd say, oh, hey, Echo, you got to go back and do a little logistics run for 4 days. Just make sure we have more supplies coming our way. Get you off the front line, get you a breather. So that way, again, the same metaphor I've used before is, if you have an engine in the red and you keep running it, what's going to happen to the engine? It's going to burn out. It's not going to be usable. If you have someone that's psychologically stressed and they're in the red and you keep running them in the red, guess what? Eventually they're not going to be usable anymore. So you need to give them a break, get them off the line. Because if you do take an engine, if your check engine light comes on and you go and get it maintained, get it fixed, the engine's still good. If you keep running it, the engine will be destroyed. So you got to do that with your people, and you got to make sure everybody knows. And I think that's a real simple metaphor to use with people as well. Say, look, we're running hard, and we're going to put some stress on the engine. And if you don't keep the engine maintained, the engine's going to break, and you won't be any good to the team. You won't be any good for the mission. So if you start feeling your engine light go on, you got to let someone know so we can give you the proper maintenance. And that's it. Jody Minnick talked about that too. Jody was, saying, hey, basically, if you get injured, if you break your ankle, they don't just expect you just to keep going. No, like, okay, you need to get back and you need to do rehab. Well, the same thing can happen to your brain. Mm-hmm. Your brain gets a break in it. You don't just keep driving or it's going to fracture and fall apart. Yep. What do? You take a break, you get downtime, and you get recovered, and then you'll be ready to rock and roll again. Yep. So two really good questions to start it off. Again, especially for folks out there on the battlefield, and it's not just for people on the battlefield, because it happens with any group of people that are in a stressful environment. I mean, obviously, cops get put into a really stressful environment all the time. Well, if you need to take a breather, you need to say something before you burn out the engine.
Yeah.
Same thing with business world, right? People in the business world get extremely stressed out. Well, you probably need a break at some point.
Yeah.
Make sure you work that in there.
Don't like police have like a mandatory program or a mandatory situation where you go through. I think like when they shoot someone or something like that, like mandatory, you have to go to like some kind of like counseling or something like that.
Yeah, most of them do now. Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense too, because even if, let's say, you don't necessarily need it or whatever, right? You go through a shooting situation, you got to go mandatory, and then I got to go through. But it's good that everyone kind of does it, because it seems like
it takes away the negative
the
view
stigma,
of it. Yeah.
Like kind of like, I'm the only guy, I'm the only guy that apparently feels this way. I'm looking around, no one else is going to counseling. Yeah. And now I'm the only guy. I must be the weak guy, so I'm not going to say anything.
They do that. They've done that somewhat in the military. Of, hey, when you come home from deployment, everyone's going to go talk to what is it, a therapist or something like psychologist. They kind of do that. I know they did that in the SEAL teams where everyone would go. They didn't do it while I was in. They'd give you like a piece of paper to fill out, which everyone just kind of gun decked.
Gun decked. What does that mean?
Just pencil whip. I don't know what. You just like fill it out. Except for Tony. You know what Tony wrote on the head of his?
What?
He wrote, "This is a cry for help." It was pretty funny. But anyways, he filled out like a whole fake one about just a funny one. Yeah.
Dang.
Anyways, I got a kick out of it.
Yeah, but it makes sense though, because of that. Because that's kind of that's really the
smart
whole premise.
way to do things. It's the smart way to do things. Let's give everyone a baseline sort of, okay, check, here you go.
Yeah.
And that way no one has to raise their hand first, right?
Yeah.
You're all going to talk to somebody. I think it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Because that's kind of the thing, right? It kind of goes along with the earlier question too. Like, if it's a water break, and hey, guys, water break, everyone's drinking water. So now it's like you don't have to feel like, the one puss who like needs his water, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah. Amen.
So yeah, if you got an issue, man, speak up. Let everyone know. That way you can do your job. You can do it longer. You can do it better. Your goal is to be the best possible be the best possible capability, so that you can go out and do your job the best. If you got issues, you got to say something so that you can keep doing your job for the team. Yeah.
It's like don't look at yourself as being weak. Look at yourself as trying to optimize your strength kind of thing. Maybe just a flip over the way you look at it or whatever.
There it is.